All right, looks like we should be live any moment now. All right, and just waiting to confirm. I've got visual on a stream going through. Yep, there we go. All right, good morning, everybody. It's been a busy day, well, busy couple of days here on both ends of the world, both Israel and Ukraine. Today, we're going to go through some of the Ukraine updates because I just don't have the time to put into a full edited video for it. So we're going to go through things just pretty much live as we go. So you might see advertisements on the screen in various places. You might see inappropriate comments underneath the ones I'm looking at. So please just bear with me. I'm going to do my best to keep things clean and tidy for you. Let's go ahead and flip over so you can see my screen. Boop, there we go. All right, so that is not the tab I was looking for. Where is the tab I'm looking for? And let's see. Hold on. Bear with me. Bear with me. Things do go badly sometimes when I'm doing things live. So let's go ahead and hit properties here and this one. There we go. All right, there we go. We're going to start off with some information out of Ukraine. I've got just a slew of things from the last couple of days. Let's go ahead and get over it. I am watching the comments, so if you have a question, feel free to hit me with it, and I'll try and get you an answer if I can get it. All right, so starting off with things in Ukraine, the Ukrainian pilots have done their homework, and they're ready to start actual training on real F-16s. It's taken a long time, but it takes a while to stand up a training program for a new country like this. So while we've got a Romanian training facility that's going in, and we've of course got the facility in Tucson, it's going to take a little while to kind of put that together and get things going. All they got to do now is get those pilots into the actual cockpits and start the real training. There was an attack over in Kharkiv, a post office terminal. This is more of a larger sorting facility. 6 people were killed, 16 injured. It's a mess. And I don't just mean all the post that's been scattered all over the place. It was a tremendous amount of damage. Let's see, I think most of these pictures should be pretty appropriate to share here. Just to kind of give you a feel for the damage there. Just kind of picking through the mess, trying to put together what happened and how bad it is. So that was a Russian missile hitting a post office. Really hitting their important targets, you can tell. Here's what it looked like from a top-down view. Just, it was nightmarish. There's videos out there of the moment of impact. People were just moving the carts full of post around to make sure that they were getting their jobs done, and then it hit. Absolutely without warning. Let's see. There's video of it. I'm not going to share that video. A little bit of low-level Ukrainian Mi8 training shenanigans, as they say. They've got a whole squad sitting there. Their cameraman sitting right there. Let's go ahead and go back and restart that video. Right there, he is literally in front of it, and he has to duck down. They are so low to the ground. I would not have the bravery to stand underneath a helicopter as it passed over inches from my head. Ukraine did return 3 more children that were illegally deported during the war. They're still working on getting more of these out. There have been 19,546 children confirmed deported from Ukraine to Russia since the start of the war. I've seen numbers as far as total deportations of people up to 700,000 that have been deported from Ukraine by Russia, and a large percentage of those have to be children. Let's see. Oh, looks like I've still got my camera off here. Not that you guys need to see my face for any of this, but still. Customs Service discovers 3,000 cases of alleged illegal imports labeled as aid. This is a retitling of a story that didn't make much sense a couple of days ago. The original story said that humanitarian aid, a third of it wasn't making it to the soldiers in the front. Well, that didn't make sense because humanitarian aid is for the populace, not for the soldiers. Well, they've went through a few revisions, and now it really has come down to there were 3,000 cases of illegal imports that were labeled as humanitarian aid. Not that those humanitarian aid didn't get distributed properly. They were mislabeled, probably on purpose, to try and get some other product through. Russians are already starting on their attacks on energy infrastructure with an attack on DTEK's thermal power station causing significant damage. That's reported by the company itself. I do not believe the whole plant ended up offline, but there was damage to the facility, and therefore they're having to deal with those repairs. 3 local residents in Kherson were accused of and arrested for spying. They were helping the Russians basically talk in their targets for strikes in the city. And if you've noticed, the strikes have been pretty specific about hitting populated groups, areas where there are active, civilian things going on. So these people were helping target their friends, their neighbors, not the military, although I'm certain they tried that too. But they were dropping things on top of civilians through all this. They were helping them do that. What kind of person does that, honestly? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is saying it may be necessary. Let me get this a little bit bigger there. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says it may be necessary to introduce multiple citizenships in Ukraine. They want to keep a closer connection with their they call them diasporas in other countries. And so they might really need to start basically giving if you live in another country but you're Ukrainian, you may be able to get dual citizenship or at least a foreign passport for Ukraine. So there's a lot of things, and there may be exceptions for like Russia in this case. I don't think a Ukrainian who's living in Russia right now would be on the most popular list for Ukraine. Unless they're like helping out Ukraine. All right, brief pause here just to make sure there's no questions or anything. I don't see anything so far. So let's move on to the news in Russia. Russia shot down another one of their own helicopters. Now, this is a Mi-8 transport helicopter, not a like a Ka-52 or something. Although they can certainly arm a Mi-8 as well, so it's been used for both purposes. Interesting, they're really clear that it was really their own fault on this. Let's see, that did not come up well. So let's just pop back to this. They say the first shoot down of a helicopter in the war was also done by Russia's own anti-aircraft systems. A friendly fire incident at the start. We're continuing with the pattern of friendly fire incidents throughout the war. I've seen this one a couple places. It's not just this source, but the Russians have now gone to AliExpress. If you've ever bought anything dirt cheap from China, you've probably gotten it from AliExpress in some way, shape, or form. And they just love to send dirt cheap stuff of questionable quality anywhere in the world. Good morning, Casman. Glad to see you here today. Thank you. It's going really well for me. I just with things so busy, I just wanted to take a little bit, do the stream so that everyone could get the latest updates and I wouldn't miss out on the latest news here. So glad to have you here. Let me know how your morning's going as well. So anyway, AliExpress engines and things like that are being used in Russian drones. Now, that does also indicate that China's not exactly watching what they're shipping over the border. So, that's just going to be a problem. We're going to have to figure out a way to deal with it. And I don't know what the solution is because we don't have that level of control over China. Okay, let's see. Right. A Muslim went for his Friday morning prayers, and as soon as the prayers were over, the riot police grabbed him and grabbed pretty much any other eligible young man and hauled him over to the military enlistment office, sat him down and said, "Sign up." And that's the kind of recruiting they're doing in Russia right now. It's insane. They're not calling for volunteers. They're doing the old fashioned, I need 3 volunteers, you, and you. And that's how it's going over there in Russia. 2 memorial plaques to the victims of Soviet repression were demolished. This should show you that, honestly, Russia is trying to whitewash their entire history. They don't want to recognize that the Soviet era was so repressive, so violent, and so brutal. They want it to be roses and song, rainbows and butterflies. They want it to be like that was our glorious era instead of our time of repression and suppression of freedom of thought. So they're whitewashing Stalin, for heaven's sakes, to make him into a popular figure again, as though he had done great things for the country. Hi, Douglas. Glad to have you here. And Theodore, thank you very much. And I do hope that you guys enjoy at least the live format. You can at least come in and comment. But it's not quite as neat and tidy as my prepared videos, but it takes a lot less time to prepare for a live. So we're trying to get as much done as we can. See, moving on, we've got, by the way, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. I am reading the comments and paying attention as I go. And, feel free to comment. I hope you guys are having a good morning this morning. Moving on, the sanctions are working. There's now a lack of imported vaccines for dogs in St. Petersburg. They just don't have enough. Now, I feel sorry for the dogs who aren't getting the necessary treatments they need. It is an indication of the effects of the sanctions are having. Okay, this is an interesting one. You're a Russian military pilot. You've just finished up you've graduated from your training course. And you sit down, you're going to have this big celebration, lots of vodka, and someone brings in a big old cake. Well, the problem was nobody knew who the guy was who brought the cake. So they're all about to dig into it. And somebody says, wait a second. Did you know who that guy was? Did you know who he was? Any of you know who this guy was? And they cut it, and they were like, hold on a second. We're not going to eat this. They checked it out. It was poisoned. This happened in Melitopol, which should tell you exactly how popular Russians are in Melitopol at this point. I mean, I don't like the idea of being poisoned by a cake, but you probably shouldn't be invading a country. Thank you very much, Lucille. Glad to have you on board. I know exactly who you are, so we'll just keep that just like that. And yeah, absolutely come back and view the rest. Well, we're only part way in. I've got a lot more to go. Still all the stuff on the front lines coming as well. All right. Yeah, this is another report on the friendly fire situation with the Mi8 and TV. Some of this stuff gets a little bit sorted out as I'm going here, so I do apologize for that happening on the fly. Russia announced they were going to start doing fighter patrols. Let me bring this up so you can see it a little bit better. Fighter patrols on the Black Sea using MiG-31L, I believe it is, or I, interceptor aircraft armed with the Kinzhal or Dagger air-launched ballistic missiles. Basically, they're trying to provide that threat of potential against civilian shipping to try and close down that grain corridor again. They're otherwise not going to accomplish anything by patrolling the Black Sea. Not with this combination of equipment. this fighter and that missile aren't going to exactly knock out the sea drones that have been terrorizing the Sevastopol. So they're not going to be able to do much with this except possibly hit ships, which is the threat they're trying to bring out. Okay, the Ministry of Defense of the UK has been paying attention, of course. There's a new private military company over in Russia. You know, one of those things that are entirely illegal, according to Vladimir Putin, that do not exist. That Wagner was just a figment of our imagination. Well, here's a new one called Redoubt, or Redoubt, I think is the proper pronunciation. They're basically a front for the Ministry of Defense, the Russian Ministry of Defense. So, you know, basically they're just recruiting people and getting them to volunteer for big paychecks up front. 7,000 personnel is nothing to sneeze at, but neither is it exactly going to turn the tide of the war in Ukraine. They finally made it official. Colonel General Viktor Avsalov is now the commander-in-chief of Russia's aerospace forces. That is after, dang it, the name has just skipped out of my head. The previous guy basically got relieved of duty in a very ignoble way and ended up basically doing just other things, anything but working in Russia. Last I saw, he showed up in Africa trying to help out down there. Tatarstan, this is over in Russia. They're basically trying to gin up more support for a mobilization. A lot of, you know, hey, if you respond, act now to get your best possible recruitment deal. A one-time payment of 300,000 rubles. That's what, $3,000? That's your sign-up bonus. And they're saying if you act now, you can get it before October 30th. Does that mean a new mobilization is actually going to happen on October 30th? I don't think so. I think the next major mobilization that will be, what's the word I'm looking for? That will be out of the normal ones will be right after the presidential election, once they have made sure that Vladimir Putin is fully and securely ensconced in the office yet again. Then I think we're going to see another major mobilization, trying to get the number of troops up to be able to fill their requirements. Okay, air defense active over Rostov. Rostov's been surprisingly active lately. It seems like there's some extra. It seems like there's some extra targets there they really want to take out, and so there's been more action in the area. But Rostov's really close to Ukraine and is a major port and hub for supplies to be sent into Ukraine. So there's likely a plethora of targets over there to be taken out. Phil, yes, Tatarstan should get into mobilization, but to separate from Russia. It's the only path to peace and potential prosperity. Yeah, we call it a breakaway region on that one. And it would be a fast way to ensure that it would divide Russia's attentions, that's for sure. We'll be talking about the budget here for a little bit, the Russian budget this time. The Russians are now getting up to a 68% increase in planned defense spending compared to the 2023 budget. That'll make it their defense spending around 6% of their GDP. Now, they don't have a GDP that looks anything like the U.S. or the EU. So it's not like we're talking huge dollars. It's just a huge percentage they're sinking into it, making it really hard for them to do things like their social programs. Or as the Defense Intelligence Update from the UK says, the Russian government spending is becoming increasingly focused on the cost of its war on Ukraine. The state's proposed 2024 budget envisions a approximate 68% increase in the planned defense spending. In contrast, education and healthcare spending will be frozen at the 2023 allocation, which really, due to the inflation and the absurd inflation, as somebody mentioned in the comments, a penny for a ruble, It will absolutely be less because of the inflation. The rubles that they're assigned will just buy plain less. The UK says this will probably cause additional inflationary pressures. And it will cause, to make difficult decisions about how they're going to fund the war, likely increasing financial pressures on Russian businesses. They're already doing things like if you're a foreign company or trying to get out, they're charging you a huge, basically, tax on everything that you sell. So even if you sell it for, like there was a company that sold it for $1, they're still going to, I saw that, Phil. If if you're a business leaving, even if you sell your stuff for $1, they're charging you on their evaluation of the value of that property. So you sell it for $1 or $1 or whatever, and they're saying, no. That property is worth 10 million rubles. You're going to give us 1 million rubles for selling it, etc. More indications that Sevastopol, got to get the pronunciation right there. They're leaving Sevastopol. There's the videos they're showing are that one underwater launch vehicle has been transferred to Novorossiysk. A launch vehicle, 8 launch vehicles, all these things are just moving from Sevastopol over to Novorossiysk. You don't abandon a base like this unless you think there's no way you can defend it. So the only way they're going to come back to Sevastopol is if they think they can push Ukraine far enough away that they cannot engage in active attacks on it. The other disadvantage Crimea has is that the U.S. and most of the European countries have said it's fine to use our weapons on Crimea because Crimea is part of Ukraine. They have not said it's fine to use those weapons on Novorossiysk, which is in Russia proper. So that's the reason they're moving these things over. They can't defend from the Western weapons, so therefore they're moving their fleet to a place that the Western weapons are just not allowed to go to. Think about it. If the defense of your equipment, if the defense of your fleet as in general is reliant on whether the guys say you can or can't use the weapons on them, you're in trouble. More about the drone components from AliExpress. I got that from several sources, obviously, because all the sources are in here. And this one just made me laugh. A deputy of the Russian Duma or Parliament wants the Statue of Liberty to be moved from the United States to Russia. He says that the U.S. has lost the mantle of being the guardians of freedom and democracy, and that Russia is clearly the country that is protecting their people's rights and people's freedoms. Hi, Paul. Glad to have you aboard again. Thank you very much for joining me, everybody. Again, I am watching the comments as I go through things, and I do appreciate you being here. Whew. Brief pause here so I can take a breath. Okay, there we go. Pause has been briefed. Let's move over to some of the international stuff here. Remember, I've still got the front lines and stuff like that to go yet, so we are now looking at the international side. Ukraine and Latvia have tested out a new grain corridor, which allows transporting Ukrainian grain to ports in the Baltic states by rail. So there's the real key here. They load them up onto rail cars. They can ship it across NATO territory to a perfectly valid port. And that means that it's going to be easier for Ukraine to get their stuff out the door, to get their stuff out and sold so the money keeps going in. If they want the statue, have Vlad go pick it up. Let's face it, he isn't too bright. It'll work, and the Hague awaits. Love it, Phil. Love it. Yeah, that'd be hilarious. Have Vladimir Putin personally show up to take possession of his Statue of Liberty, and therefore have a nice arrest squad just waiting for him. Oh, gee. Okay. Yeah, rail is expensive and it is limited. It's just better than the alternative of having that grain just sit there and be available to be blown up. Also, grain that sits for too long, well, can go bad over time. You just don't want it sitting there. You want it over there and being used. I'd love to have a little bit of levity in my stuff. When I'm doing the edited stuff, I try and keep it kind of that dry type of humor, and it's a little bit. You just kind of have to be paying attention and know that what's coming next may not be fully all factual, but maybe a little tongue-in-cheek opinion. Oh my heavens, Avdiivka! We are going to get to Avdiivka in a bit here. It's that is there's just no other way to say it. It's a mess for Russia, but that's fun anyway. President Zelensky says he spoke with Erdogan in Turkey and said they were thank you for the consistent support for Ukraine. Turkey's been a real back and forth. They talk to Russia, they talk to Ukraine, they talk to everybody else. I really think that Erdogan wants Turkey to be the regional power. And while they are getting their fingers in a whole lot of things, I'm not sure they got the horsepower to do it. But overall, they are supporting Ukraine in most cases, and I think that is well appreciated. Germany is putting out another $200 million for Ukraine's reconstruction, and that'll be for healthcare, education, drinking water, and urban reconstruction. It's hilarious, isn't it, Casman? Anyway, so Germany is allocating more money for reconstruction. There is another report, which I may still have in here, but I'm not sure. I'll just address it real fast. Germany is also saying they don't think they have allocated enough funds to properly support Ukraine's military needs at this point in time. There it is. In fact, it's the very next thing. The German Defense Ministry is concerned about insufficient funds for Ukraine in 2024. It's just not budgeted enough yet. So they're working on it. May be interesting to see if something changes in that way. And overall, I suspect Germany's still going to be a solid partner in this matter. Okay, what is this here? It's been long, and I've slept since I looked at this one. Oh, there it is. Okay. Germany has providing some amphibious rig vehicles. That means vehicles that can be used to transport equipment across a river or other water body. But these are pretty flexible pieces of equipment. They can both be used as basically ferries, or you can link them together to make a bridge. So you've got both options there. If you keep them unlinked, you can move individual equipment across and keep them in motion, which makes them harder to hit. Or if things are secure enough, you link them together, you drive a whole bunch of equipment across, and then when you're done for the day, you unlink them and stash them away in different places. So that, say, a Russian Su-25 can't just bip along with a missile or two and take out your little bridge. India and Russia have been they're an interesting pairing. I'm going to put it that way. I don't think India is fully on Russia's side, but they are not fully embracing the West either. So they're still doing the trade. They're doing things in India's self-interest. In this case, their self-interest is to take advantage of a weakened Russia for everything it's worth. So the trade basically imbalance there is getting enormous between Russia and India. And that is the international front there. We're about to go into the front lines, and I'll start with a summary and kind of go around the whole place as a kind of what I remember off the top of my head. And then we'll get into some of the details and go through them all. Okay, so we're going to start off. Let's see. There we go. Yep, we're going to start off up here. Yes, my mouse can be seen. Perfect. So we're going to start off up here in Kupiansk. And the deal here is that let's see, I don't think I can't draw on this right now. Okay. The deal here is that Lyman Pershey and Sinkiivka, Russia was trying to make a real push in this area. They have been pushed back, and Ukraine has actually recovered some territory. That means that Russia is not able to put out a real full-on force in this area to be able to take territory and hold it. Ukraine is in a defensive position, but even when they're kicked out of one of their positions, it's not just the next day before they're right back into it, and Russia is turning tail and running. Russia's still very violent and very much a threat in the area, but they aren't seeming to be able to sustain operations in the Lyman, Percy, and Kupiansk area. Moving down here, let's see, most of this front has had action, but no changes to speak of. But we're going to take a brief pause over here at Berhivka, which is just north of Bakhmut. Bakhmut's this big, let's see if I can get it perfect right there. Bakhmut's right over here, this big area, or get my mouse kind of circling it a little bit. Berhivka's up here to the northwest. And the Russians seem to have been slowly kind of pushing the Ukrainians back from this area. I think they have removed some of their reinforcements out of this area and are basically being a bit of a flexible defense on the north end to favor the south end near Klishchiivka, where they have been making pretty remarkable progress. Klishchiivka, now there's no changes in the line since the last time we had the map, but these are delayed. There's been a lot of talk about more of this area around the railroads to the northeast of Klishchiivka. And with Ukraine having pushed through both of the tree lines on either side, that means the Russians can't use them as a real defensive position anymore. Great progress all across this area for Ukraine. Each time Russia tries to counterattack, they lose more equipment, and they end up being pushed back even more. So this area is still very active and still moving forward. I'm going to briefly touch on Avdiivka here. We kind of know that on the north end near Krasnohorivka, which is right up here, Russians have made some small amount of progress. They keep talking like they have taken that slag heap. Let me see if I can get the topographic here. They keep talking like they've taken that slag heap that gives them a kind of a way to look over Avdiivka right about in here. But each time they say they have, there's literal video evidence that they have not. And that's just says that they're pouring more and more troops trying to eke out a victory. Somebody said this looks like a Gerasimov operation. And that makes sense. That's exactly how Gerasimov seems to think from a strategic and a tactical level, is pour in more and more equipment and soldiers until you plow your way through and make it into the area you're trying to get into. The south end, let me bring that up, kind of center it a little bit here. The Russians have managed to kind of move a little bit to the west towards Pervomaisk, whatever, that one, the P word right there, Pervomaisk. I'll check the pronunciation on that later. They're moving kind of that to the west there. That does not do anything for encircling Avdiivka. All it does is put them into a larger engagement range with any of Ukraine's forces on the west side there. Overall, the reports out of Avdiivka are the Russians attack, the Ukrainians slaughter them all, and that's kind of been the repeated mantra all throughout. The last attack actually seems like it was a little bit weaker than the runs before, so they may be running out of steam in that area. No big changes near Volodar that I've seen, or this axis right here south of Velika Novosilka. My tongue's getting a little tied right now. There have been some changes near Verbova here, and it's been making gradual progress. Let's get that kind of centered up here. Both towards Kapani on the west and towards Verbova on the east. There have been somebody said that there's been progress towards Novofedorovka, over here on the east side. I've not seen any real information on that. Let's pull up the defensive fortifications just kind of so you can see what's going on. They changed the... Oh, they're simplified. There we go. They've changed the color scheme on it. I like the black better. But anyway, get that right there. The word is that they're making additional progress kind of on the north end of this kind of salient. And that there's been this kind of this pocket coming in that the Russians have managed to hold on to. It's a little bit of an elevated position, but they're being outflanked on 3 sides now, and it's really becoming untenable for them. There's also word that the Ukrainians have managed to make some additional progress along this trench line just to the south of this little pocket. And really overall, while there's not a lot that you can put on a map and say, hey, we're making huge progress, there is still a lot of things going on, and the initiative is still with the Ukrainians. Pulling back out. I've not seen any changes in this area right here for a while, so I'm kind of thinking it's kind of died down, at least for now. And a quick summary of the situation over near Oleshki and the Antonovsky Bridge. Ukraine has been expanding their foothold in this area. Now, a lot of that is on these islands just right along the river here. But the Russians are continuing to talk about Ukrainian presence in Poema, Pishkanivka, and making additional progress, and in fact, holding Krinky itself. Now, this map shows none of that. So, Ukraine is either being extremely tight-lipped about the situation around there, which for operational security absolutely makes sense, or the Russians are making up a bunch of crap. And if they're making up things in hopes of being able to, do a glorious victory for Russia by saying they have kicked the Ukrainians clean off this area of the Neper River, it's kind of backfiring because Ukraine's not saying anything about it. And if Ukraine's not confirming there's a significant presence there, it's going to be hard for the Russians to say, wow, we have totally managed to kick them off of this area. So other people have said, why in the world would they go over the Dnieper River? Well, if they do, they cut off Crimea effectively. They can come along to the down the main roadway here and cut off Crimea from the south end. Hi, Robert. Glad to have you here. Thanks for joining me today. And Paul, we're just waiting on Tokmak to really kick off. It's going to happen. It's a question of when, but it's happening. But yeah, if they cross the Dnieper, they can literally come in and cut the supply chain off from Crimea. They've already managed to do a lot of damage, but that's a straight shot to Hinishevsk and through several logistics hubs in that area. So that's why they're trying to come through the Dnieper River and make it all happen. Okay, that's kind of my overall summary of the situation. Let's go look at some of the detailed posts here. Russians counterattacked west of Robotina, but there's no indications whether there's actual success in it. So we're going to be watching that as it goes on. This is from this very morning, so it's the latest data. Literally hot off the presses. Ha ha ha. And then, of course, I mentioned the Ukrainian gains north of Verbova along the trench lines, which still waiting for a visual confirmation. By the way, and since I just happen to have the opportunity and I have you all here, and I don't ask for this often, but if you are enjoying today's video and finding out something new, hit me with that old like button. I do appreciate it. All right, so this reporting here is all from War Gonzo. War Gonzo is a source from Russia. It is not on the Ukrainian side at all. So I read these through and I take them with a grain of salt. However, War Gonzo, by and large, is mirroring what I see from the Ukrainian side in most cases, which indicates that they are being honest by and large in their reporting. It's just their perspective is the opposite side. Kherson direction. More clashes on the left bank of the Dnieper in the area of Peshkanivka and Krink. The Ukrainian artillery extremely active. The Ukrainians are not talking a large-scale attempt to cross the Dnieper. So that makes that local battles. This is the guy he's being honest about it and saying that the only people who are talking about this being a wider thing is the Russians. Now, could it become a wider thing? Absolutely. It's going to depend on Russia's response to the situation. If they put up a fairly effective defense, this is going to turn into a limited raid and they go right back across the Dnieper, or they take some of the islands in that area. Zaporizhia, Ukraine advanced west of Novofedorovka. That would be kind of north of that salient we mentioned before. Village still a long way away, but they're still making some progress there. And he also mentions the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to get behind the positions on the heights northwest of Verbova. Much like that little salient I mentioned before, that's exactly what they're talking about here. Volodar, no real change. There's a tactical advance of the Russian armed forces, they say, near Priutne. I've seen no proof of it, but it's possible. And Marinka, Severny, their Stepnoy, they've made a lot of attacks near Donetsk, but no real, there's only progress in, they call it Berdyachi, or in that area. So I'm not seeing a lot of progress from Russia at all. A lot of attempts to make progress, though. And this is let's see, that was day before yesterday's report. This is yesterday's report. More about Peshenivka and Krinky in the Kherson direction. And now he's saying that they're trying to make it a full-on bridgehead. They're using a lot of artillery and long-range weapons, and they're, of course, being opposed in that landing attempt. Volodar, Russian armed forces counterattack near Poltavka and Priutne. They also try to take some positions at Staromayorsk, but it does not look like they report any advancement there as well. Donetsk, still extremely hot. No promotion. The whole situation around Avdiivka there is a real complicated mess. Russian channels are saying that the Ukrainians are not letting up in the Zaporizhia direction, basically hitting with everything they've got near Verbova, Novoprokopivka, and Robotina there. So they're keeping up the pressure, not allowing the Russians to transfer troops away from that area. They're still attriting the forces there, but it is a gradual slog, not a huge, amazing, wow, we've just advanced, 10 million kilometers today. More explosions near the Berdyansk airport. I am waiting to see what additional results might have come out of this strike. Even if it was 2 days ago, I've seen no further reports on it, and I'm wondering if there is additional damage. From the Ukrainian, secret spy people, the secret squirrel people, there we go. The Ukrainians are reporting that there is a growing resistance movement in Crimea. A large number of citizens actively help the Ukrainian security and defense forces with information and more. They often put themselves in danger. There is a resistance movement in the occupied territories. It is actively developing, actively interacting with the security and defense forces, the special operations forces of the main intelligence directorate, and the security service. It is giving very good results and is developing. From various sources, from interceptions, from operational data, we see to what extent the resistance movement of Ukrainians in the occupied territories pesters the occupiers. This is the action of a populace that sees which side is winning. You don't start snitching on the Russians unless you think the Russians are losing. And that's the real takeaway here. The Ukrainians, even in the occupied territories, even in Crimea, are seeing real results coming from Ukraine. They are probably predisposed to already want those results to happen. But if they didn't see them, you can guarantee that the little old lady is not going to take the time to call up the intelligence directorate and say, hey, look, a whole squad of Russians just marched past my house. And if they don't think that they're going to get the reward of being liberated again. So really, it shows that the mindset in the occupied territories is changing. Kind of glancing up at the comments real fast. Imaginary Russian progress reported on the military summary channel. Dima is the worst. True colonoscopy vision. Yeah, everybody's really, you got to report, if you report the facts, if you stick with the facts, you will never have to say you're sorry for them because you stuck with the facts as best as you can determine. And too many of these people are like, we have victoriously advanced to the rear. We have made sure the Ukrainians captured absolutely nothing in their advance, except for they advanced, So cheerleading either side from the perspective of providing these types of updates is a bad idea, because sometimes the Russians win. Sometimes the Ukrainian wins. But in the end, if you stick with the truth, you can make your own decision, not me about who's winning and who's losing. I know which side I want to win. But in the end, I try and report the facts for you. And the so-called explosions rang out in Tokmak. That's right. They're already all over Tokmak this morning. And that is literally the latest information. That's this morning. They are working on Tokmak. They're keeping it in. I heard they were in basic artillery range, so they're not even having to use HIMARS or ATACMS or any of the advanced like missile systems. They're using conventional artillery at this point. Since we are on the Crimea subject and specifically some resistance groups emerging, a question from a previous listener on a video a month or so ago, what is the mindset of civilians inside Crimea? I obviously have no more insight into their mindset than anybody else. I have my opinion based on the overall situation I'm seeing in the reports I'm seeing. I believe that there is a larger and growing group that has begun to see the Russians as purely occupiers, as the enemy. And the number that are seeing Russians as the good guys has plummeted. That still leaves a large chunk in the middle that just want to lead their lives, and they don't care who's in charge, just let them lead their lives. But with the expansion of these resistance groups, with the expansion of the abilities of the Ukrainians to strike at will within the territory of Crimea, we're seeing more people say, I want Ukraine to win. My opinion. Okay, this is some of the information on Kupiansk, and it's kind of, I already mentioned most of it. The overall situation is that as things have managed to get, tamped down on the rest of the front, Ukraine is able to move some of their reserves from some of the areas that they had to dedicate them to, now that the main threat from Russia has been basically reduced in those areas, and moving back to Kupiansk so they can actually cover and basically keep the Russians from making any progress up there. That might be what's happening, but this is from Gray Zone. This is a Wagner-affiliated and now Russia-affiliated account. So take their analysis, usually pretty close to accurate, but take it with that old grain of salt. Let's move on to the details out of the Kherson directions. And a lot of this I'm going to read straight up because this is straight out of Gray Zone. I have no other confirming because this is basically Russia perspective stuff. Let's see. The background of what happened a week before the active actions of the enemy. The enemy has accumulated a lot of troops in that area, making up for losses and redeploying a number of units from other directions. This is all Kherson, Neper River. But the reserves were not because the previous ones had run out, but because it was necessary to create a numerical advantage within the framework of the necessary offensive potential in a number of areas. Basically, if Ukraine's going to do anything with the Kherson direction, they need numerical advantage. Bringing reserves in is not to maintain, but to expand. In mid-October, the enemy carried out a partial temporary withdrawal of the capacity of 3 bridges across the north this area. The Ukrainian side also began destroying our communication towers within their range of weapons. Destroying communications throughout the area is vital to successful military operations. Carrying it out when the enemy can totally communicate exactly what's going on everywhere means that somebody will be able to coordinate a response. No comms, no response. The consensus on the ground is that the high command stuck its head in the sand and did not respond appropriately to the crossings in this area. On October 17th, so we're going back a week now, in the area of the village of Peshanivka, up to 40 enemy personnel represented the Ukrainian armed forces landed on boats. The Russians discovered this around noon. At the time, the Ukrainians had already entered the settlement itself, and they hit them with artillery for a while. Let's see. So basically, they're in Pishkanivka. They do a lot of things back and forth. They fought hard. And then the Ukrainians began evacuating from Pishkanivka back towards the railway and down towards the bridge. They took some artillery hits, but they ended up still retreating. But then the Ukrainians carried out another landing in the area up to a platoon. And then they dispersed through the area, meaning that they were not in a clump that artillery can directly affect. So now they're having to deal with things piecemeal. And they're not able to use drones because of active electronic warfare. Good job on the Ukrainians for having the signal jammers and things like that right where they needed them, meaning that they couldn't do it. October 18th, a sabotage and reconnaissance group came in. They landed in the Krink area, or as they call it, the Krinak or Krinka or whatever. That's one of those pronunciations. And went into the forested area southwest of the village. And they carried out some raids on their forces on the highway there. In fact, we saw some video of that. Then October 19th, they landed 20 more people in the area of Krinky. And they provided cover for this landing with strong artillery strikes. They're working this area over really hard. Arrivals, as in artillery strikes into Krinky area, every 5 seconds for several hours. And the Ukrainians are reported to have dug in. They did not retreat outside of Krinky, but that was what they originally thought. On the 21st, more landings near Peshkanovka. No offensive actions. They dispersed and basically dug in. This is kind of a summary of the overall situation here. So that's what's going on in Kherson, according to the Russians. The Russians also believe that they should prepare for a 2-front offensive in the area. More prepared people were spotted in the Kherson direction. Enemy personnel, meaning Ukrainians. Here, the picture is different from Zaporizhia. They recruit quality trained fighters, distribute targeted equipment, both water and ground, expand bridgeheads, reconnaissance groups in force, all accompanied by NATO reconnaissance in the sky, preparations for crossing the Dnieper using pontoon equipment. They should expect at least 2 fronts to be opened in this area, is what they're saying. They're saying that the Ukrainians are producing and putting their highest quality troops at Kherson. That may or may not be true, but that's the Russian thought. Larger than usual ground operations on the left bank of the Kherson region, especially in Krinky and the area around there, according to the Institute for the Study of War. And this is from 2 days ago. Good map of the kind of area here, where you can see that this is the places they're fighting over. The truth is that this is where we're going to start seeing a lot of this happen if there's a real bridgehead established. If the Ukrainians can take and hold villages and areas around here. Lucille, when he says BRB work, BRB means he'll be right back. Work means that's the reason he's leaving. He's got work to do. The same thing with Krinky. The Russians are trying to kick the Ukrainians out, and yet they're still maintaining a bridgehead and holding territory to at least some extent. And that is the situation on the Kherson front. Let's move over to Avdiivka. And we're going to open up, kind of quickly scanning this article from the Kyiv Post. Can the Russian army really be that stupid? One guess. Over the past 3 weeks, Russia has thrown away something like 2 to 4 brigades of trained regular army troops against the very strongest Ukrainian fortifications. They are talking about, they're not sending in the green recruits. They're not sending in the people that have literally been handed a rifle and said, go to the front. These are their trained regular army troops they're trying to hit Avdiivka with. And they're still at it. They're still trying to make progress in this area in large scale. And that's the real concern, is why are they doing this? They've already seen at least 50, maybe even 100 armored vehicles, including tanks, destroyed in this direction. They've already seen that there was 2 major assaults right at the beginning, and they lost a ton of equipment. This all fell apart because they drove straight into prepared and pre-targeted fields of fire. So the Ukrainians were like, okay, start dropping artillery. But the Ukrainians did one better. They dropped, artillery dropped mines behind the Russians. So if they turned around and went back, they'd drive right into a freshly placed minefield. That fixed them in place in the kill zone and put them right in the position where the Ukrainians had their range, had their position, and had artillery to take them out. The problem is this is some of the most fortified area of the front. This has been a place that's been under contest since 2014. There have been Donetsk People's Republic military units trying to take this territory for 9 years now, 8 to 9 years, and they've made no progress. The Ukrainians have been pouring tons and tons of concrete and reinforcements into the area. They have built this Avdiivka into a fortress in the area. If the Russians could take it, it would be a tremendous propaganda coup. It would be a tremendous blow to the Ukrainian morale because they have poured a ton of resources into this area since the start of the conflict, not in 2022, but in 2014. And that's why I believe Gerasimov said that this area must fall, regardless of the cost, because he has to deliver a success. He has to deliver some amazing thing to make Putin say, this is a good thing. And so far, he's not been able to deliver that. Has just thrown more and more equipment into the area. Move scanning down here. The Russians thought they could pull off some of that stuff with airstrikes. They thought by striking the area with their glide bombs, which they can now launch from a little bit farther out of the air defense range, they hoped that they could pull this off. And sure, the glide bombs come in, they hit something, maybe blow up something. It turns out they're not hitting the actual positions because they're not that accurate. They might ring a few bells, they might blow up a few landmines, but they're not hitting the fortified positions where the Ukrainians are holed up in. It looks impressive. It makes for great, attack reels, video reels that you can put on Instagram and put on TikTok. What it doesn't do is provide true tactical or strategic advantage. It looks like this should be a place that's easy to take, but the problem is that means you've got to put your vehicles into an area, and everything has already been channelized. So you end up with a long column of vehicles driving down a road. They're stacked up right on top of each other. The first one hits a mine, everything else just bumps right up against it, and now they've got an entire row of things they can plaster with artillery. And the Ukrainians don't let a stopped vehicle just sit there in this area. They're not planning to retake that stuff. They're not going on the offensive in this area. So any Russian vehicle that stops is plastered until it's dead, until it's literally burned up to a crisp. So they stop in a line, they plaster that whole line with artillery, they plaster it with drones, they hit it with everything they can until there are no vehicles left. If they dismount, they throw more drones and more artillery at it. It's clear that the Russians are not thinking this through. They are not necessarily blindly, but they are following orders without looking at the actual tactical implications of what they're doing. 4 of these attacks were pushed around October 10th through 14th. There's been another push sometime in the last couple of days. They're still trying. They're still pouring men and equipment into this area. To the effect of, as of this morning, no positional changes were reported or confirmed in the Avdiivka direction. They say they've taken that little slag heap that gives them an upper area, but Ukraine says, no, you haven't. And until we get pictorial evidence, that place is still in the gray zone. That said, Ukrainian forces did pull off a counterattack to the south. You can see it just on the bottom end. It's this blue area with the little arrow. They've captured a little bit more territory near Pryutne just down there. Phil, you are absolutely correct. The elite forces do not exist at this point in time. That said, there's still regular army, which should have been trained to the highest level available to them. Those regular forces are what's literally being ground down right now in Avdiivka. The best of what's left does not make it the best of the best. Another hit on a facility in Donetsk itself, this time with a HIMARS strike, which makes it a high-value target. This is where the Russians were planning their attacks on Andriivka, and that's where it's all taking place here. They want to make sure that they're getting everywhere the Russians are, Avdiivka. I said Andriivka. Getting my city names all mixed up here. Let's see. Yeah, and Avdiivka. There we go. So they're making this progress. They're making sure the Russians cannot pull off the victories they want. The Institute for the Study of War's updates over the last few days have talked about this extensively, saying that the Russians are suffering heavy losses, and these are provable losses. These are not ones that were like, oh yeah, they lost, we know they lost this much just because we shot this many bullets. These are on video, on camera losses, and they are taking them hard. Another counteroffensive was repelled just yesterday, and they inflicted heavy losses on Russian troops in the area. They did make marginal gains northwest of Avdiivka, as in small, tiny, itty-bitty ones near the waste heap. The Russians are saying that they've taken that area. The Ukrainians are saying they haven't. They're working this area over, and it's going to be a long, hard slog for the next while if Russia doesn't give up the attack. According to the Defense Intelligence of the UK, the assaults on Avdiivka have contributed to a 90% increase in Russian casualties recorded by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. It's likely that Russia has suffered It is likely that Russia has suffered 150,000 to 190,000 permanent casualties, killed or permanently wounded, since the conflict began. And with the total number, including the temporarily wounded, as in ones who could recover and return to the battlefield, in the region of 240,000 to 290,000 people, not including Wagner forces that were ground down to nothing in Bakhmut. So the Russians are just throwing meat into the grinder at this point. Ukraine is taking losses as well, but not to the extent that Russia is in Avdiivka. And then we'll end off our Avdiivka part with a little comment from Dmitry at War Translated. Russian serviceman Dmitry Filatov, known as Vozok Z on Telegram, says that Russian soldiers who rotate from Avdiivka return with empty, icy eyes after heavy battles. He also says the Avdiivka strongpoint is hidden underground and little Ukrainian activity is noticed on the surface. But that's PTSD right there. Those are Russian soldiers who are returning mentally shattered, if they return at all. And as much as no matter how you look at it, this is a horrific thing to happen to anyone. The mental health bills after this war is over will be enormous. And the associated suicide rate will be enormous as well, because this is the fight of good against evil. This is the place where you see things that you never want to see and hope nobody ever does. And they are seeing these things happening. They will never, ever be the same. And that's happening to both sides. All right, brief pause here, then we'll go into the interesting extras. Let's see, the regular forces seem to not get great training, and the influx of replacement drags unit averages down. Truth. Wasn't the Russian army a 280,000 member force pre-war? I believe they had a larger standing army than that before the war. They invaded with 100 to 200,000. But their standing army is actually pretty significant beyond that. That said, most of that's probably non-combat troops at this point in time. Your pencil pushers, your clerks, your Gerasimovs, people that don't really have much value on the front lines. So that's the overall situation there. These are the interesting extras, though. Here's a video of a Hawk surface-to-air system firing at targets on October 23rd. They're using systems that have not been in active use by the U.S. for a very long time to take care of problems in Ukraine. The Russians can't even counter our 30, 40, and even sometimes 50-year-old gear. That's the situation they're in at this point. Harvesting in Ukraine. Oh, look at this. I planted a missile or a bomb. They're having to pull these things right out of their fields before they can actually plow them and take them on. That missile obviously has lost its explosive nose cone, but even so, that's got to be scary as all get out. And this guy's in a regular tractor just doing it, and this guy's in an SUV pulling things out of the ground. Hopefully they already had it cleared by military forces, or this is the military forces taking care of these ordnance. The Grad Rocket Tree. Exactly, the Grad Rocket Tree. This video, it's too long for me to really go through the whole thing. But there was a lot of... These guys really commented on the M109A6 Paladin. They comment about a lot of things that are about it. He says it's so easy to use. Basically, the thing knows where it's pointing anyway. You just feed it the coordinates. It points the barrel and takes care of the business. He says that you could possibly take somebody who's motivated and train them to use it in a week. Plus, it's got air conditioning and heating and much more comfortable than those Russian tanks that they've been using all along. So overall, you're looking at the high tech here. This is where technology really hits the road. This is where the difference is. You can manually target artillery all day long, but when you've got an artillery system that'll pinpoint place a shell exactly where you need it in moments, that is amazing technology on the battlefield. This video, and I'm going to just state right now, it's making the rounds right now, and there's been a lot of debate about what we're actually seeing. A lot of people are seeing these are Gaz AA trucks that were built in the 1930s. I am not so convinced, and I'll show you why. Number one, it wouldn't surprise me if they still had some around and they were busting them out to just have a truck, because trucks are a big problem for the Russians right now. I think instead it is more likely to be, let me see if I can pull up a good picture here. There we go. That's perfect. Yes, it's in Ukrainian colors, but that makes it even funnier to me. The Gaz 63. It looks very similar to the Gaz AA truck from the 1930s, but these were built from in the late 40s to the late 60s, maybe even into the 70s. They got the design down and they just built a ton of the things. It looks very similar to the Gaz AA truck, with the main difference that you could see the split windscreen right here versus the single windscreen here. They identify it as a Poltaruvka or something, Polutorka. There it is. They identify it as that, but I'm not sure that the quality is good enough to really tell. That said, and I am not sure one way or another, they identified it in the field as being this 1930s era Gaz truck. And I have to defer to them. But there's another truck that looks very similar, like I said, if you were looking at it on a low resolution screen. So that's my thoughts there. Oops, things have gotten out of order here. Let me move this over because I want that to be last. By the way, if you're ever tailgating somebody and you see this, you probably don't want to be tailgating that person anymore. That looks like a TM62 landmine just right there on the tailgate. I think I'd be holding back. Check out this mortar position. They've got it all wooded up, you know, on the sides here, so that you can walk into the trench network. But when you get to the mortar position itself, it's got a roof and a screen on the front. The roof is on casters. So literally they just grab it, they pull the top back, and it's already, they pull the top back, and there you go, you've got your firing position ready to operate, and it's easy to push it right back in place, and you're hidden once more. That fast. Isn't that slick? That is just slick as all get out. Let's see. And how's this for a missile launch from the Russian side? I would not want to be anywhere near that as it fell back to the ground. Bad day in the Russian army. And let me see. Hold on. Yep, this is correct. We'll end off today with our cat pictures and, well, video for the day. Here's how you count your sheep. You got to make sure you got a cat there to count them for you. And that's everything for today. Before I close up, is there anybody that has a final question before I shut down? Let me know in the comments. I'm watching. I thank you all for joining me, by the way. I do appreciate it. And yeah, Phil and Lucille and all the people on here, Robert and Paul and everybody else who's been on here. I think there was an Edward or something like that. Eduardo, Douglas. Thank you again for joining me today. I want you guys to know that that even though I don't have a lot of time to put these videos together, I'm still closely following the Ukraine war, and I want to make sure that that we're getting all the good information that we can. Let me know if you're missing anything, you think I'm missing anything out there. When I close the video, regular comments will open, and you'll be able to post a regular comment, not just a live comment on the chat. And I don't see any questions, but thank you again. You have a great rest of your day, and we will see you on the next video.